Hello and welcome to the first part of the lecture on hotel organization structure. This part will be done online. We'll follow up with the second part in class. So part one will be dealing with the operations part of the rooms side of the hotel business essentially. Whereas part two will deal with the other departments who have a direct relationship with that, including the sales and marketing side and the revenue management side. All of these areas, of course, are great career paths for you. So let's talk about the hotel chain and its organization structure first and give you a little bit of a general idea and try and give you some variations of how that operates. So typically you have a headquarters or corporate office. So in my day with one of the big companies, the biggest company in the business today, Marriott, we had a headquarters corporate office in Bethesda, Maryland. We also had regional offices in different parts of that time of the United States. We didn't have a big overseas aspect, but there was an office in Europe at that point. Now they have offices all over, of course, including Asia. And those regional operations are then responsible for all of the hotels within the region, obviously. Sometimes based on brand, sometimes based on all the company affiliations. It can vary a great deal here. And then, of course, you have the property management and the property management structure. And that's our primary focus here. But it's important to realize there's a hierarchy within organizations. And the bigger the organization, the more regions, the larger the corporate headquarters. In a lot of cases, especially those companies that we will talk more about that have more of that central control aspect of things as opposed to those that are more oriented towards the property having the authority level. So in a typical hotel, this is a very typical organization chart of the executive committee, or EXCO as it's often called in this part of the world. Under the general manager, you have a director of engineering, director of HR, director of food and beverage, director of marketing, resident manager, or more frequently in these days called director of operations, and a controller, controller being the financial person. Now there are other variations of this in many different cases, as I'll kind of highlight as we go through the different organization structural aspects within the different departments. So first off, the Department of Engineering, probably not an area that any of you are going to pursue. It's a very specialized area, but the maintenance, the operations, making the hotel work on a daily basis. And obviously if you get more complicated when you get to a resort aspect of it, you can have outdoor recreational facilities like golf courses, beaches, etc., that fall typically under that director of engineering. And many of the vendors that they have to deal with, of course, are going to be outside contractors. Hotels don't do their own lifts. They don't do much of their own equipment aspect of things. But a chief engineer is looking at the basic daily maintenance and keeping the place up. But you also have an inside laundry, an internal laundry. We'll talk more about the laundry aspect later. That typically reports to the director of engineering, although it's a housekeeping function in many ways because it's so much equipment oriented. They have to be involved in that. A greenskeeper for golf courses and so on would report to the director of engineering. We won't spend a lot of time on this because it's not a career path that I expect any of you to ever pursue, but it's something that you'll need to understand if you're going to be a general manager somewhere down the road. Rooms division. Now here's where we begin to talk about the areas that are most intriguing and interesting and where your career paths will most likely tend to start. So a resident manager or director of operations, as I said, more commonly today you see it called a director of operations. And by the way, resident manager is a term that doesn't necessarily mean the person lives at the hotel. And general managers don't necessarily live at hotels. Overseas, a lot of times they do, but not in most cases. In most cities nowadays, they don't. So you have a front office manager that is responsible for front desk, concierge, bell captain, PBX, which is the telephone system, or if you will, the communication system of the hotel. We'll talk more about that in more detail. Reservations manager, housekeeping manager, director of security, and if they're retail operations, Oftentimes retail managers report to the director of operations. Now that's an interesting area in itself. I won't go into a lot of detail there because most of you won't pursue that side, but some companies do their own retail and they like to focus on that. Marriott was one of those that did that. However, a lot of companies prefer to use an outsource for the retail aspect, and so therefore the director of operations is not really managing that side of it. They're just sort of overseeing it in that case like that. Food and beverage, which we'll talk a great deal more about. Restaurant managers, executive chef. Now, this is one area here. I'll circle this executive chef. My circles are not great, but I circle the executive chef. This area here, in a lot of hotel companies, especially the ones that focus more on the food and beverage side, this person reports directly to the general manager and not to the food and beverage director. In a Marriott type operation, they typically report to food and beverage operations. A director of catering for the banquets, director of catering being the term mostly used in the Western world, whereas banquet managers, banquets, director of banquets might be used more here in Asia. Room service manager, and then the last position over here, the director of convention service. We'll talk more about this as we get towards the MICE side of things, but this person historically began with a reporting responsibility to food and beverage, but many times today they're their own department, especially in the major convention hotels, or they may report to the director of marketing. Some cases they do report to the general manager directly. So there's lots of variations on that. Hotel departments. All right, let's talk about front office rooms division, including housekeeping. More likely aspect of where the jobs are that you might pursue outside of the food and beverage aspect of hotels themselves, which we'll cover separately. This is the typical guest cycle, and I think it's important to recognize what's on top here. The guest cycle doesn't start with the guest arriving at the registration, which you see here as the second level. All right, they start right here with that was supposed to be a check mark. There we go. With the reservations, starts with the reservation being made, something done in advance, today mostly done online, right? Then you have the arrival. The guest incurs charges while they're there, which are posted to the rooms, to the guest charges are posted to their folio, is what it's called. You verify that with the night audit, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, and then you check out. You know, that's your basic process of what you go through. Now, there are many different contact points as we go along, but important to note, good test question, where does the guest cycle begin? It begins with the reservation. It doesn't begin with just the arrival. That's important to understand from the rooms division perspective. So in the rooms division is made up of the front office staff, or basically front desk agents who check you in, check you out, so on. But it also includes the reservation staff, although in many cases today I've seen reservations in hotel groups fall under the sales aspect. Why? It's an advanced booking. Advanced bookings are handled differently than the operations of the day-to-day aspect. So sales tends to be more focused on advanced bookings of group business. Why not include reservations, which is the individual business at the same time? Housekeeping, of course. Concierge, talk more about that. Guest services, security, and the communication side of it, which used to be more telephone today, and today it's probably more focused on your IT elements of your communication than it is on what happens on the telephone within the room. So basic functions of front desk. Well, sell rooms, because you do have walk-in people, and it's not as common, but it is certainly one of the opportunities that the front desk has. Selling rooms also can mean upselling rooms, selling someone who has come in booking one type of room with why they might want to consider a higher level room and pay a little more for it. They maintain the balance on the guest accounts. They're basically the hub and nerve of the center. It's where the person arriving, where their first contact is, and so on. So you would think, right, it's the most important person when that person arrives, that they would be the highest paid people in the hotel, wouldn't you? Ha ha, I hope you're laughing at that. Not a chance. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily see it that way. Maybe something to think about for the future. What are you paying the people who are the most important first contact person at the hotel? Are you paying them enough to make that actually show that you understand that. I know my own personal experience is when I'm greeted by a really high quality front desk person, I feel that I'm going to get a great service from beginning to end. So they rely on the front desk for information and services throughout their stay, though. It doesn't just happen at the one time that they arrive. You know, they might be coming down there to check on a package that might have arrived for them, or to get another key because perhaps the magnetic strip on the key doesn't work. That happens to me way too often. Whatever it might be. Could be in our situation here, certainly in Asia, it could be for currency exchange. Those kind of things happen there too. So there's a lot of different kinds of interactions. Again, justification for why people in that level should perhaps be recognized more and given more pay, although I'm sure you won't get that when you start, but it's an ideal future when you get to that leadership role to think about. The night auditor, I mentioned this a little bit before. Interesting position. In the old days, you know, everything was done by hand, so you had to have someone come in at night under the green eye shade, as you see in this picture here, and they're checking every little item that comes in. Well, today it's all automated, but they basically close the books on a daily basis. They are the ones who put out the night report, the daily report, as it's called, that lets everyone know the next morning when you arrive or when you check your mail, what the occupancy was, what the average rates were, what happened the night before, all those kind of things. And they post charges, they check the guest accounts, they basically turn everything over from one day to the next. They're the people responsible for the overnight, whatever that might be, from the midnight to 6 a.m. or whatever shift that might be. That's an interesting position to start in a hotel because you become the hub of the hotel at that point, for sure, because there's no general manager around. You oftentimes have to make decisions in that role. Now, personally, I avoid calling early in the morning, for example, for a late checkout to a night auditor, because a night auditor is usually thinking more analytical and what they have coming in, what they have coming out. They're not necessarily your top service people because they're not interacting with guests as much. At least that used to be the way in the old days. So I call afterwards when I know the front desk staff is on, when I get the friendly, nice front desk person who says, oh, yes, of course you can stay later. In that context of talking about rooms, we need to talk about room rates and what we call different room rates. So let's go down these. Rack rate is what we would call the published rate for that room. It's the maximum rate that you would charge for that room. In the past, what rack rate represented was a point where you started every other rate from. So every other rate was a discount off of the rack rate. In my days with Marriott, rack rate didn't really mean much of anything. When I came to work for Shangri-La in Asia, there was a presumption that rack rate was the rate. And we had to do some educating that it wasn't necessarily the most successful way that you were going to get business, particularly online. People were looking for deals. But today what you hear, and the terminology you hear most frequently, is best available rate, or bar rate, B-A-R, bar rate. The bar rate is the rate you, as the public, see that that hotel is charging tonight for that room. When we talk more about revenue management, we talk about the change in the flexibility in bar rates on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis in terms of what's being offered based on what we feel the occupancy is going to be. But best available rate is oftentimes, during low season, better than some of the other rates like corporate rates. In fact, a recent study I was just reading said that all of the negotiations that corporations do for special corporate rates throughout the year, if they're not based on a percentage of bar rates, that more than half of the time the hotel is offering a rate lower than that corporate rate during the year. That's an interesting statistic, and it might put some jobs in jeopardy in terms of the global travel managers out there in terms of their clout. And so probably going to be an area that's going to be looked at in how that's handled more effectively in the future. So corporate rate, I mentioned that right away. Oftentimes corporate rate is just considered a discount rate for the year. So a lot of cases you just give one flat rate for the year or for a period of time, 6 months, whatever it may be. And that's when you have the problems with the bar rate. If your corporate rate is flexible to the bar rate, then obviously you don't have that. I would say corporate rate to a general corporation, maybe 10% off of the rack rate. But you will give volume discounts to corporations who give you more room nights. Obviously, somebody gives you more business, you try and give them a more effective rate. Now, you're still trying to make a profit off of this, so you're not going to give away the hotel at any point, but there are differences in terms of how rates are structured. So you have corporate rates, you have negotiated corporate rates, so on. Government rates are usually per diems, whatever the government per diem is for government employees. Some hotels won't take a per diem rate because they simply are too low for what that hotel is about. And you, by the way, control these rates by what you have open or closed on your website, on your reservations channels, whatever they may be, by varying that. So you might not have, in a very high-end expensive hotel, you might not have very many rooms available at a government rate, even if you had it available. You might say, well, I'm sorry, government rate is sold out for tonight. Senior rates, which many hotel groups have, fortunately I can take advantage of those, but I can tell you that a lot of times they're not available during the time that you want them if it's a popular time. And then group rates, and when we talk about group rates here, and we'll talk more about that in the sales and marketing side of things. This is a negotiated rate for travel groups is one thing, could be for meetings, could be for lots of different reasons, a wedding and so on, where you have a number of guest rooms being used. If you're giving a volume number of rooms, then typically group rates are negotiated by the sales department. Whereas all the other rates that I mentioned previously are available through online resources or through toll-free numbers or whatever method that you might have. Group rates are negotiated through the sales office, so that one's a little bit different. The property management system, or PMS, is a computer-based applications, right? It's your reservations management, it's your rooms management, your guest account management, general management is what you're basically looking at on a regular basis as to the reports that you get. So it's where the reservationist goes, where the salesperson goes, even for that matter, to gain knowledge of what our occupancy is going to be tonight, how many rooms do we have available. In the rooms management, it helps to actually determine what rooms the guest gets. Today, you're seeing more automation in these processes where guests can even choose rooms. I've had that happen with Hilton, for example, where I can choose the room. I had that happen in a Marriott recently, and I said, but I don't know the hotel, so I don't know which room to choose. Why, how would I know, right? In the process of things. And it's the guest account management once the guest is checked in. It's where you put all the charges that that guest has in order to give them the information. And general management, it is the tool used to forecast. It's the tool used to look at what we are expecting tonight in terms of rooms, what we had last night. It's what that night auditor is using to go through and analyze the system. Okay? So it is the key information system in the hotel operation. Now, how do you get reservations? Well, phone is still there. It may not be the percentage it used to be, but that's where you have a contact with the person through reservations department, right? Or it could be a salesperson, but they have to have good telephone skills. Could be a central reservation office. Could be calling a toll-free number and getting a central reservation office someplace in the world and making the reservations through that person there. They have to be able to know the hotels, have the right information, be able to upsell the hotels, explain to them why one room is different from another, and so on. Reservations online, that's the most common method that we have today, obviously. Direct through hotel website is the direction that hotels are trying to move. You see more and more hotels giving advantages to the guest who will use that online website, like free Wi-Fi, special discounts, so on. ISG will give special discounts. Marriott gives free Wi-Fi. Hilton gives free Wi-Fi. They're all trying to push it this way. Or online travel agents. Now, the hotels created online travel agents. Now, they existed before 9/11 when September 2001 came along, but all of a sudden hotels didn't have any business and they had to find a way to get business quick. So they started pushing all their reservations to these OTAs because they were getting a bigger, broader market. So they created this. So they created Expedia, Booking.com, Ctrip. if you will, the big players, Ctrip in China, the big players of Expedia and Booking.com throughout the world and all their various subsidiaries. They created them, now they're trying to pull back from them. It's an interesting dynamic going on in the industry. And then you have global distribution systems. Now the global distribution systems were a computer system, essentially, IT, created by the airlines. The airlines had their booking systems for booking their airlines, and they said, hey, we could create a method to be able to book hotels here. So today, a lot of the resources that you use in a hotel for your online availability to someone trying to find you actually gets routed through a global distribution system. Now, what's the difference in these three? A hotel website, what do you pay for that? Well, if you're an independent hotel, obviously there's no cost to it, well, but you had to develop it. If you're a part of a group or a chain, you're going to be paying a fee to the chain, but it's much less than you pay to the online travel agent. And also the fee you pay to the global distribution system is another higher fee. So if you are ideally trying to find the best method to get the best profitable room, you want to get through your own hotel website. However, you can't be everywhere. And Marriott may be trying to be these days with the number of hotels they've grown to, but that still doesn't put them in a position where they will necessarily be able to get that reservation from anyone, anywhere who's shopping, because they're going to shop through the OTAs because they feel they have a better scope of all of the options out there. And then the global distribution systems is just another channel that you use internally. As an individual booking a room, you don't know necessarily you're going through a global distribution system. That being the case, you would perhaps think that you were booking through a resource that went to the hotel directly. Some of the definitions under reservations. What's a guaranteed reservation? Guaranteed reservation is one where we have a credit card on file should that person not show up. Now, guaranteed reservations basically say, I'm not going to charge you today, but I'm going to guarantee this if you cancel before a certain period of time. Now, that time had been, up until recently, 6 p.m. of the day of arrival. Excuse me. However, there's a trend that Marriott has started to move this to a 24-hour basis. Now, resorts have always done 72 hours, sometimes a week in advance, because they don't have the ability to replace the room overnight. Because city hotels had the ability to replace rooms a lot of times, and if you didn't show up by 6 p.m., they would just cancel your reservation. Even if you showed up afterwards, you might not have a room if they were going to sell out. But now they're finding, even in their case, they have to go further out. And it's a new trend that's starting, and I don't know how it's going to be received, particularly from corporate travelers. It's not going to be a popular item because corporate travelers have to change their schedules sometimes from day to day as to where they're going to be. They have to stay longer someplace, be another place early. I think this is going to be a challenge for the industry. The advance deposit or advance to payment, you don't see this very often in city hotels, but you see it quite frequently in resort hotels. They want something up front. They want you to pay in advance, or they charge your credit card at the time that you book. Of course, Airbnb charges you at the time that you book. It's a method to basically guarantee the reservation with the guarantee. What's a no-show? A no-show is when you have a guaranteed reservation, or advance deposit for that matter, and you don't show up. If you don't show up and you had a 3-day reservation, typically in a guaranteed reservation, you only get charged for one night. You don't get charged for all 3. Hotel has the ability to make that up. It's not always the case, but that's how it starts. Why does a no-show happen? Many different reasons. People's schedules change, flights don't get connected, all kinds of things that happen along the way. But no-shows can be quite a challenge if you're in a convention city where you're just one of the hotels in the room block for the group. People will book your hotel, and at the last minute they'll be able to get into the hotel closer to the convention center, for example, and they will not cancel their reservation, they just won't show up. If they don't have a guaranteed reservation, not a big problem, except that you as a hotel maybe went down without that room being sold. 6 p.m. reservation, as I mentioned already, that's part of the guaranteed aspect of it. If you don't guarantee a reservation, then 6 p.m. you can release that room, and there is no obligation on either side. And as I say, that's kind of going away these days. You don't see too much of that. They want a credit card when you book. The concierge, great position, especially if you know the city. Part of the reason I say that is there's a lot of opportunity here to learn your city, to be very involved with the guests. This is the person who's supposed to be the most informed about what's going on and understand how to upsell the various services that you have as a hotel to offer. How do you get flowers into the room? How do you get a special gift here? How do you find this? What store to shop in here? What restaurant to go in here? They make dinner reservations and tours, and by the way, they usually gain a commission either for themselves or the hotel, mostly for the hotel, but they get tips in some parts of the world for that kind of service that they do. They handle unique guest requests. You saw in the video that we saw earlier on the Waldorf Astoria how the concierge had to go out and get Nikki Hilton her special emergency cream and what they did. So you got a good picture of that, right? They serve as the knowledge of the city, and they oftentimes have to speak several languages in countries such as ours, here in Singapore, where you need to be able to have those kind of skills in order to communicate with different guests that come in. The laundry, I mentioned this earlier, the laundry falling under the rooms operation is an interesting dynamic going on in the industry today. It's been going on for a while as to whether you're going to do the laundry in-house, you're going to build your own laundry within the facility. Now this is for large hotels, or you're going to go outside. Now Marina Bay Sands, they have their own laundry. Some of the other hotels around here, they outsource. Some of the other bigger hotels, they outsource. So what are the pros and cons? Well, the advantage of outsourcing is that it's not the core competency of the hotel, but it is the core competency of a laundry. So you cut major costs. You don't have all those maintenance costs, all the overhead costs of energy and water. They all go out there. You have a fixed amount that you pay that's projected each month based on how many guests you have. No training required. Boom, all taken care of by somebody else. They bring in they bring in all the par stock of the sheets, the pillowcases, everything to you every day. It just turns around. You don't have to do anything except clean the room and then make the room, right? But the cons are that you're relying on an outside partner. What if something happens to them? What if they're also serving your competitor? What if they mix something up in the process? A slower turnaround. Obviously, you do it in your own hotel. You can go down and get something washed immediately, get it done, get it right back up. Whereas you have to send it out. Then you got other customers. They have to give you a time frame. So that means that you also have to have more par stock. In other words, instead of having 2 sets of linens for a guest room, one that's in wash, one that's on there, you might have to have 3 sets because you have to have 1 set that's being washed, 1 set that's being transited, 1 set that's on the beds. You have to add to that, so you have to pay a little bit more up front. And they're not available 24 hours for laundry service. You can't just grab a guest laundry, which we used to do at the Marriott World Center when we had our own. We did our own laundry. Now, admittedly, they were not all that good when they first started. I used to have my French cuffs would be folded on the wrong side and ironed on the wrong side. They had to learn how to do that as an employee. I got free laundry. That was a nice perk. And you don't have full control over that quality of the laundered linen either. If they don't wash it correctly, if they don't do the things correctly, if they damage it, you're the one that's going to have to pay for that that amount. And lastly, let's talk about the security and loss prevention department. Security and loss prevention department is, again, probably not an area that you're going to work in within the hotel, but you need to understand it because they're a critical aspect. Of course, security is a big factor. That's by nature there. But they also are the ones that are looking at the equipment. They're wandering around. They're not wandering. That's probably not the right way to put it. They're going out throughout the hotel to make sure that things are working properly. They're the key control people, the master key control people. They're the ones who know who has an ability to get into something and who doesn't. They're the ones who manage the safety procedures on how work is being done, make sure that employees are lifting things correctly. They educate on that side. They do that. They identify all kinds of different and the identification procedures, I should say. Who are the right employees? How do they get in? There's a company in the U.S. right now that's putting a chip inside your hand to check in and to get your food from vending machines and so on. A personally, I don't need to do that to check in. I can put that on my my ID card. I'm fine with that. But that's perhaps the way of the future is we'll do all this stuff by chips being planted in our hands. And they'll know when we come and when we go and so on, right? And ADA in this case, the terminology here is the American Disabilities Act, but what I'm really referring to here is to make sure that all of the facilities for those who are physically impaired have the ability to get into the hotel, make sure that they're there in the process, that the hotel is doing the right things, they're not blocking entrances, all those kind of things. Okay, so that completes our discussion on the rooms part of the operation. In part 2, we'll continue with some other aspects of it, but this will prepare you a little bit, and you'll also learn some more in this from our professor for a day when we are able to actually hear a little bit more from people who are doing this on a daily basis and see how it operates. But I want to give you some of the basic background behind it. All right, thank you very much.